I'm hiding in a hotel bathroom right now, shaking as I type this. 3 hours ago, I found my wedding dress shredded to pieces with scissors still on the floor. Yesterday, my venue called to say they're canceling due to aggressive behavior from the bride that never happened. Last week, my fiancé's mother accidentally spilled red wine on our signed marriage license. And right now, my fiancé is outside this bathroom door telling me I'm mentally unstable and imagining everything. If you had told me 6 months ago that the charming, loving man I agreed to marry would be gaslighting me while his mother systematically destroys our wedding, I would have laughed. But here I am, 74 days away from what's supposed to be the happiest day of my life, documenting this nightmare as it unfolds because I'm terrified I'm actually losing my grip on reality. I'm updating this in real time because new sabotage keeps happening almost daily, and I desperately need objective perspectives before I completely break down. Let me back up. Mark and I have been together for 3 years, engaged for 8 months. We met when his investment firm acquired the tech startup where I was working as a marketing director. It was electric from the first moment. Within 2 months, we were inseparable. By 6 months, we were living together. And everyone called us the perfect couple. I've always known he was close with his mom, Diane. She's been a widow for 12 years after Mark's father died, in circumstances no one talks about clearly, a red flag I ignored. And Mark is her eldest son. I actually thought it was sweet how attentive he was to her. The weekly dinners, the daily phone calls, the way he consulted her on major decisions. I come from a fractured, emotionally distant family where my parents barely acknowledge my achievements. So I was genuinely excited to marry into what seemed like a warm, close-knit family that actually expressed love openly. When we first got engaged, Diane seemed thrilled. She hugged me, cried, called me daughter, the whole thing. She immediately offered to help with wedding planning, which I gratefully accepted. My own mom lives across the country and isn't really the wedding planning type. The first red flag appeared about 2 months ago. After an exhaustive search, I had secured our dream venue, a stunning converted historic barn with a lake view that had exactly one Saturday available this summer, which happened to fall perfectly on our anniversary. I put down a $3,000 non-refundable deposit that depleted most of my savings. I remember calling Mark in tears of joy when they confirmed our date. 2 weeks later, the venue coordinator called me, her voice uncomfortable. She wanted to confirm that I wanted to cancel our wedding date. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I hadn't canceled anything. She explained that someone claiming to be me had called not once, but 3 times, insisting the wedding was off and demanding the deposit be transferred to a different account. This other Emma had somehow known intimate details about our booking, the exact date, time, my contact information, even the specific menu restrictions I'd requested for my allergic cousin. I was hyperventilating by the end of the call. When I told Mark, he barely looked up from his phone and suggested it was probably just a mix-up with another bride with a similar name. When I pointed out the statistical impossibility of another bride named Emma having the exact same wedding details, he accused me of being dramatic and said wedding planning was obviously stressing me out too much. I was able to salvage the booking by physically going to the venue with my ID, but I remained deeply unsettled. That night, I overheard Mark on the phone saying, "No, Mom, she managed to fix it. I know, but we have to be more careful next time." When I confronted him, he claimed they were talking about a surprise birthday party for me. My birthday is 10 months away. Then the invitations incident. I had 120 beautifully addressed invitations ready to mail. I left them on our dining table overnight, and the next morning, I couldn't find about 30 of them, all from Mark's side, including his college friends and extended family. Mark suggested I had miscounted, or perhaps they'd gotten mixed in with other papers. Diane stopped by that same day. She has a key, red flag in hindsight, and commented, "Oh, are these the invitations? They're finally going out?" Something about her tone felt off. When I mentioned the missing invitations to my best friend, Shemaid of Honor Claire, she immediately asked, could Diane have taken them? I dismissed it as ridiculous. Things escalated last month. Our caterer called to confirm we had switched our menu from the elegant sit-down dinner we planned to a casual buffet with considerably cheaper options. Again, someone had called impersonating me. When I told Mark, he laughed it off as wedding vendor chaos and told me I was getting too stressed. Yesterday was the breaking point. I went for my first dress fitting. The seamstress looked confused when I arrived and said, "Oh, we expected you yesterday with your mother-in-law." Apparently Diane had called to change my appointment, showed up herself, and tried to get information about my dress. The seamstress, bless her, felt something was off and didn't reveal details. I finally brought all this up to Mark last night. I laid out the pattern and suggested that maybe, just maybe, his mother was behind these coincidences. His reaction floored me. He became furious. Not at his mother, but at me. He accused me of being paranoid, said I was turning into a bridezilla, and suggested I needed therapy for inventing conspiracies about his mother. When I started crying, he stormed out and went to, guess where, his mom's house. He came back this morning acting like nothing happened and suggested we take a break from wedding planning because it was making me crazy. I'm sitting here in our apartment while he's at work, questioning everything. Am I crazy? Is this all coincidental? Am I the bridezilla he claims I am? Claire thinks I should set a trap to catch Diane in the act. My brother thinks I should run far away from this family. I'm torn between loving Mark and I'm being increasingly terrified about marrying into this situation. Update. Same day, evening. Thank you all for the supportive comments so far. You've given me courage. I decided to do some investigating. I called our florist under the guise of confirming details. Sure enough, someone had called last week to change our order from the elegant arrangements I chose to basic carnations, which Diane once mentioned were her favorites. The florist had emails confirming the changes, sent from an email address almost identical to mine, with just one letter different. I was sitting with this new information when Mark came home. I planned to calmly show him this evidence, but before I could, he dropped a bomb. My mom suggested we move in with her for the first year of marriage to save money for a house. I literally choked on my water. This is the first I've ever heard of this plan. We already live together in a nice apartment. We don't need to save money. We both have good jobs. When I expressed shock, he acted like we'd discussed this before. I asked when his mother had suggested this, and he admitted it was last night when he went to her house after our fight. I told him absolutely not, and he got defensive again, saying I was constantly attacking his mother and trying to separate him from his family. I finally snapped. I showed him the florist's email trail proving someone impersonating me made changes. I laid out all the incidents. I told him he needed to open his eyes. His response? Maybe the florist made a mistake. Maybe you changed the order and forgot. Then he said the words that broke my heart. Even if mom did make a few adjustments, she has more experience with these things. You should be grateful for her help. He's sleeping on the couch tonight by his choice. I'm locked in our bedroom updating this. I don't know what to do. Our wedding is in 74 days. I've already spent thousands on non-refundable deposits. But more importantly, I'm seeing a side of Mark I never knew existed. Update. Next morning. I barely slept. Around 2 a.m., I decided to look through Mark's phone while he was asleep on the couch. I know, invasion of privacy, judge me all you want. What I found makes me sick. Dozens of text exchanges between him and Diane discussing the wedding. Her, I fixed the catering situation. The sit-down dinner was ridiculously pretentious. Him, thanks, Mom. Emma doesn't need to know. Her, did you suggest the living arrangement? Him, working on it. She's being difficult lately. There was more, so much more. They've been coordinating behind my back for months. Mark has been fully aware of his mother's interference. Even worse, he's been gaslighting me into thinking I was imagining things. I took photos of the messages as evidence, then quietly packed an overnight bag. I'm writing this from Claire's apartment. Mark has called 37 times and left voicemails alternating between apologies and accusations that I'm overreacting. Diane has also called, which is strange because I never gave her my number. I'm supposed to be at work right now, but called in sick. I don't know if this relationship can be saved. I don't know if I want to save it. Update. That evening, things have taken an even more bizarre turn. Mark's brother Tom showed up at Claire's apartment. I've only met Tom a few times. He lives in another state and isn't close with Mark or Diane. Claire never told anyone where I was staying, so I was immediately suspicious. Tom came in peace. He apologized for tracking me down. Apparently, he hired a PI friend. Creepy, but he meant well. He then revealed the reason for Diane's extreme behavior. Mark was previously engaged 5 years ago to a woman named Kira. According to Tom, Diane successfully sabotaged that relationship using similar tactics. And Mark allowed it because Kira came from money, and Diane convinced Mark she was only interested in their family's business connections. I was speechless. Mark never mentioned a prior engagement, not once in 3 years. Tom showed me old family photos with Kira in them. He gave me her current email address and urged me to contact her. When I asked why he was doing this, he said, "This cycle has to stop. My mother has controlled Mark my entire life. I got away, but he never could." Tom left, and I immediately emailed Kira. She responded within an hour and suggested we meet for coffee tomorrow. I'm terrified of what I'll learn, but I need the full picture. Mark continues blowing up my phone. His latest tactic is threatening to cancel our honeymoon reservations if I don't come home to discuss things like adults. The honeymoon I paid for entirely. The emotional whiplash is exhausting. Update. Next day, I met Kira for coffee this morning at a secluded corner table in a cafe 2 towns over. I was expecting someone bitter or broken. Instead, I met a poised, successful attorney with a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. She's now happily married with a baby, living what seemed like an alternate version of the future I thought I'd have with Mark. I barely touched my coffee as she methodically laid out the details of her relationship with Mark. The parallels were so exact, it felt like we were discussing the same script with different actresses. The whirlwind courtship, exactly 3 months before moving in together just like us. The identical romantic gestures, including the same spontaneous weekend trip to the same cabin where he proposed to me, and even the same phrases to describe their connection, like we've known each other in past lives. Diane's pattern was identical too, warm and welcoming initially, calling Kira the daughter she never had, then gradually undermining every aspect of their relationship. What differed was the final act. After our engagement party, things accelerated, Kira explained, sliding a folder across the table with documentation so extensive it looked like a legal brief. Diane began suggesting I should quit my law practice once we were married because Mark needs a wife who's available. When I refused, items started disappearing from our apartment. My bar exam study materials, case files, my grandmother's wedding ring. Mark insisted I was overworked and forgetful. She showed me photographs of her apartment after what Mark had described as a small electrical fire while she was at work. Only her home office was damaged, with her computer and backup drives destroyed. The fire inspector's report noted the suspicious nature of the blaze, but nothing could be proven. Then came the bombshell. 2 weeks after we broke up, I discovered I was pregnant, she said, her voice steady but her hands trembling slightly around her mug. When I told Mark, he seemed overjoyed, talking about getting back together, co-parenting, how this was meant to be. He even came to my first ultrasound and cried when we heard the heartbeat. 3 days later, he stopped answering her calls. A week after that, she received a package via courier containing a letter from an attorney, a contract with an NDA, and a cashier's check for $250,000. The letter explained that in exchange for terminating the pregnancy and signing the agreement never to contact Mark or any member of his family again, the money was mine, she said. It was signed by the family attorney, but the handwritten note paper clipped to it was from Diane. It said simply, "My son deserves better genetic stock for his children." Kira refused the money but ultimately terminated the pregnancy for her own reasons after learning about chromosomal abnormalities. She never signed the NDA, which is why she could legally tell me everything. She had saved it all: emails, medical records, the attorney's letter, the uncashed check, and most disturbingly, surveillance photos of her that had been included in the package as a clear threat. The most chilling part, she said, leaning in closer, is what I discovered later. A mutual friend let slip that Mark and Diane had a 5-year plan they called the Lineage Project. They were deliberately seeking women with specific genetic traits, physical features, and intelligence markers as potential mothers. But apparently we were just being auditioned for a role and none of us made the final cut. I felt the blood drain from my face as I remembered finding the chart tracking my menstrual cycles and the note about genetically inferior stock in Diane's handwriting. "There's one more thing you need to know," Kira said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Mark's father didn't die of a heart attack like they claim. At least that's not what Mark told me during a drinking game once. He said his mother freed them from his father when he threatened to leave her. When I asked what he meant, he changed the subject and never mentioned it again. I barely made it to the bathroom before vomiting. This wasn't just wedding sabotage or controlling behavior. This was something methodical and twisted beyond my comprehension, a multi-generational scheme with elements that bordered on eugenics, and I'd almost become another chapter in their disturbing family saga. I thanked Kira for her honesty. As I was leaving, she grabbed my arm and said, "The most painful part wasn't losing Mark. It was realizing the man I loved never actually existed." I was processing this when I got back to Claire's to find my sister Lucy waiting there. Apparently Mark had called her, they've met maybe twice, claiming he was worried about my mental health and suggested I might harm myself. Lucy, knowing this was absurd, came immediately to warn me how far Mark was willing to go to regain control. I decided enough was enough. I called Mark and told him to meet me at a public coffee shop to talk. Claire insisted on sitting at a nearby table as backup. I expected denials or excuses. Instead, Mark arrived with Diane. Seeing them sitting there side by side, similar expressions of wounded innocence on their faces, something clicked. The fog lifted. I saw with perfect clarity what I was really dealing with. I placed my engagement ring on the table and said simply, "The wedding is off." Diane immediately began crying loudly, drawing attention from other customers. Mark switched between comforting her and hissing at me to stop making a scene. I said, "I know about Kira, I know about the pregnancy, I know everything." The color drained from both their faces. Mark recovered first, voice icy. "Kira was a liar who tried to trap me with someone else's baby. The lawyer's letter offering money to terminate said otherwise," I replied. Diane stood up so forcefully her chair toppled over. "You ungrateful little bitch. Do you know how many strings I pulled to get you that venue? Your taste is atrocious. That ridiculous dinner menu, those tacky invitations. I was helping you." The coffee shop went silent. Everyone was staring. Mark just sat there saying nothing as his mother continued her tirade about how I never deserved her son. I looked at Mark, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. I walked out without another word, ignoring Diane's shouts behind me. Update: that night. I'm back at my apartment now. Mark is staying at Diane's, of course. Claire came with me as backup to collect more of my essential items. The apartment felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else's life. While gathering my things, I found a stack of our missing invitations hidden in Mark's desk drawer. There was also a folder containing what looked like wedding insurance paperwork I never knew about, plus a prenup draft I was never consulted on. The prenup included clauses about family property rights that essentially would have given Diane approval rights over major purchases we made as a couple. As I was photographing these documents, on Claire's advice, Mark's friend Steve came by to pick up some things for him. Steve has always been nice to me, but firmly in Mark's camp. To my shock, he asked if we could talk privately. Once Claire stepped outside, Steve confessed that Mark and Diane had a similar dynamic in every relationship Mark has had. Steve had witnessed this pattern multiple times, including with Kira, and had finally reached his breaking point with Mark's behavior. The most chilling part, Steve revealed that Diane and Mark have a joint bank account I knew nothing about. Mark has been depositing 30% of his paycheck into it for years, money that should have been going toward our future. Steve also confirmed the pregnancy story, saying Mark had confided in him when Kira first told him about the baby. Mark had initially been excited to become a father, until after a weekend at Diane's. I asked Steve why he was telling me all this now and not sooner. His response, because last night, Mark asked to borrow my cabin upstate to teach you a lesson about loyalty after you came back. Something in the way he said it scared me. I'm now staying at a hotel Claire booked under her name. I've contacted a lawyer. I've called my parents, who are flying in tomorrow. I've documented everything. The wedding is officially canceled. I've lost thousands in deposits, but I've gained something priceless. Escape. Update. 3 days later. These past few days have been a blur of lawyer consultations, police reports, and emotional breakdowns. But I'm hanging in there. After Steve's warning about the cabin, I filed a police report documenting my concerns. The officer was surprisingly understanding and helped me get an emergency restraining order against both Mark and Diane based on the threatening text Mark sent after I left the coffee shop, which I hadn't even mentioned in my update because they seemed minor compared to everything else. My parents arrived and have been incredible. My usually stoic father broke down when he saw the prenup documents. "This isn't love, Emma," he said. "This is ownership." We went to the apartment with a police escort to collect the rest of my belongings. The officer had suggested I prepare myself for the possibility of damaged property, but nothing could have prepared me for what we found. The apartment, our home for 2 years, had been systematically violated. It wasn't random destruction from anger. It was calculated psychological warfare targeting my most precious possessions. My grandmother's antique pearl necklace I'd been planning to wear as my something old wasn't just broken. Each pearl had been individually crushed, and the fragments arranged in a perfect circle on my pillow. My childhood journals hadn't just had pages torn out. Selected entries about my deepest insecurities and past traumas had been highlighted and annotated in the margins with comments like pathetic and damaged goods. The most chilling discovery was in the spare bedroom closet. A makeshift shrine-like arrangement contained photos of me sleeping, photos I never knew existed, strands of my hair collected from my hairbrush, and a detailed calendar tracking my menstrual cycles with notes about optimal conception dates. Next to this was a medical file, my medical records that should have been private, with fertility information highlighted, and a handwritten note in Diane's distinctive script that read, "Genetically inferior stock, needs correction after marriage." The officer, a 20-year veteran, visibly paled. "I've worked domestic cases for a decade," she said quietly, "but this level of obsession and planning is unusual." She immediately called for additional officers and a forensic team. As they were documenting everything, Diane somehow appeared at the apartment, though no one had notified her we would be there. She was dressed immaculately in a designer suit, her makeup perfect, looking nothing like the raging woman from the coffee shop. She tried to breeze past the officers as if they were doormen, claiming she had every right to be in her son's home. When they blocked her entry, her demeanor instantly transformed. She began screaming that I was stealing family heirlooms and trying to ruin Mark's life just like all the others. The officers firmly told her to leave, and that's when she pulled out a small canister from her purse and attempted to spray one of them in the face. It was later identified as a concentrated chemical irritant, far stronger than commercial pepper spray. She was immediately restrained and arrested, not just detained, for assaulting an officer with a chemical weapon. As they escorted her to the police car, she locked eyes with me and said with terrifying calm, "You'll never be free of us! He always comes back to mother. Always." The officer advised me to consider changing my name and leaving the state. "People with this level of fixation," she explained gently, "rarely just move on." I thought that would be the climax of this nightmare, but yesterday, things took an even darker turn. My boss called to tell me someone had emailed the entire company, including our clients, with fabricated evidence that I had been embezzling from the company. The email came from an anonymous account, but included private details only Mark would know. IT confirmed the email originated from Mark's home computer. My company is standing by me. They know it's absurd, but the professional damage control has been intense. The lawyer says this strengthens my case for the restraining order and possibly opens the door for defamation charges. Then last night, things took an even more terrifying turn. Claire discovered a sophisticated tracking device magnetically attached under her car, the car we've been using to move my things. We only found it because her mechanic brother was checking her brakes and spotted it. The police tech unit confirmed it had been actively transmitting our locations for at least 9 days. What made my blood run cold was when they traced the purchase. It wasn't just bought on Mark's credit card. It was part of a bulk order that included 3 more identical devices. The detective asked me pointedly if I had recently checked my own car, my parents' vehicle, or had any wearable items that Mark or Diane had given me that seemed unusually heavy or had hidden compartments. In a panic, I remembered the peace offering bracelet Mark had courier delivered to my hotel 3 days ago, a heavy silver piece I'd thankfully left unworn in its box. The officer carefully disassembled it to reveal another tracking device, embedded inside the clasp. The technician said these weren't ordinary consumer-grade trackers available on Amazon. They were sophisticated models typically used by private investigators or corporate espionage operations, with extended battery life and precision tracking capabilities down to a few feet. The officer asked if Mark had any law enforcement or military connections, and all I could think of was his college roommate who now worked for a defense contractor. I vomited in the police station bathroom. This wasn't just wedding sabotage or a controlling partner. This was methodical stalking by someone who had the resources, knowledge, and determination to maintain surveillance on my every movement. The man I had slept beside for 3 years, who had proposed with tears in his eyes talking about our future children, had been secretly tracking me like prey. The detective suggested I check my phone and laptop for spyware. The IT security specialists they recommended found remote access software on both devices. Software that could activate my camera and microphone without my knowledge, access all my files, read my messages, and track my browsing. I've been completely exposed, possibly for months. I'm in shock that the man I agreed to marry, the man I was planning to have children with, could do these things. Each day reveals new depths to his disturbing behavior that I never saw before, or maybe refused to see. The most terrifying question haunting me now: what was the end game here? What would happen if I had gone through with the wedding without discovering any of this? Update. I've been hesitant to update because things escalated to the point where my lawyer advised against sharing details online, but I feel I owe you. The restraining order is now permanent against both Mark and Diane. Mark violated it twice, once by sending me flowers with a card that read, "Till death do us part," which the police initially didn't take seriously until my lawyer pushed, and once by, coincidentally, showing up at a restaurant where I was having dinner with my parents. The second violation resulted in actual consequences. He's now facing criminal charges. Diane had a complete meltdown at the courthouse, which didn't help their case. In an unexpected development, 3 other women have contacted me after hearing about my situation through mutual acquaintances. All dated Mark in the past, and all experienced similar patterns of control, manipulation, and Diane's interference. None had the full picture that Kira and I now have, but together, we're seeing the complete, terrifying mosaic of Mark and Diane's relationship. Tom, Mark's brother, has been surprisingly supportive and is getting therapy to deal with his own childhood under Diane's control. He's provided valuable insights into their family dynamics that help explain, though not excuse, Mark's behavior. I've secured a new apartment in a building with good security. My company offered me a transfer to our Seattle office, which I'm seriously considering. The distance would be good, and it's a promotion. As for the wedding vendors, most have been understanding once I explained the situation. A few even offered partial refunds despite their contracts. I'm donating my wedding dress to a charity that provides gowns to military brides. The hardest part has been grieving the relationship I thought I had. I keep asking myself how I missed so many red flags. But my therapist, yes, I finally started therapy, says that manipulators like Mark excel at presenting a perfect facade. The relationship was real to me, even if it was a carefully constructed illusion on his part. Update. I've accepted the Seattle position and am moving next week. My apartment is packed up and I'm ready for a fresh start. Mark's criminal case is proceeding, though his family's connections are working overtime to minimize the consequences. The tracking device and email harassment turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg. Diane attempted to contact my parents at their hotel before they left town, causing another scene that resulted in hotel security getting involved. Her behavior has become so erratic that even some of Mark's relatives have reached out to apologize to me. Kira and I have become unexpected friends through all this. She's been an incredible support, understanding exactly what I'm going through. She's helping me recognize manipulation tactics I never knew existed. The other surprising relationship to emerge from this disaster is with Tom. Not romantic, we're both very clear about that, but he's become an ally in navigating the legal aftermath. He's testified about Diane and Mark's history of problematic behavior, despite significant family pressure. I received a letter from Mark yesterday. My lawyer read it first and said I could read it if I wanted to, but advised against responding. Mark expressed regret for how things turned out, but still maintained that much of what happened was a misunderstanding, or Diane acting alone. No real accountability, no genuine apology, just more manipulation dressed up as reconciliation. I didn't respond. Update. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my new apartment in Seattle, with a panoramic view of Puget Sound. The physical distance has helped, but the psychological journey has been far more challenging than the geographical one. The legal issues have progressed but aren't fully resolved. Mark initially pled not guilty to all charges, but when digital forensics recovered, deleted messages planning the surveillance operation in detail. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal. He received what many consider a slap on the wrist: probation, mandatory therapy, and community service. His family's connections to the judge didn't go unnoticed by the media. Diane's case has been more complicated. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder during her psychological evaluation, which her defense team has used to mitigate her responsibility. She violated the initial restraining order 3 times, culminating in an incident where she was found in the parking garage of my new building in Seattle, 2,000 miles from her home, with disguise materials and a taser in her vehicle. My company has been incredibly supportive, installing enhanced security and accelerating my promotion to a vice president position that would normally take years to achieve. My boss pulled me aside last month and admitted they were terrified of losing me after what happened. Dating has been complicated. I went on one date 4 months after moving, and he seemed perfect, attentive, respectful, successful. Then I discovered he'd connected with me on a dating app right after accepting a junior position at one of Mark's family's companies. The PI I now keep on retainer confirmed he had met with Mark 3 times before matching with me online. I haven't tried again since. The wedding that never happened would have been 2 months ago. Instead of wallowing, I hosted a dodged a bullet party at a shooting range. Dark humor has become my coping mechanism. My new friends and I celebrated my escape while learning self-defense techniques from a former military instructor who specializes in helping stalking victims. The network of Mark's previous relationships has expanded beyond what I could have imagined. What started as 3 women has grown to 7, spanning back 15 years to his high school girlfriends. We've formed a support group of sorts, sharing our experiences and warning signs. The patterns are identical across all relationships, though they've grown more sophisticated and controlling over time. Tom called yesterday with news that made me physically ill. Mark is engaged again, just 6 months after our breakup. The new fiancé is the daughter of one of Diane's church friends, a 22-year-old just out of college with no family of her own, after losing her parents in a car accident 3 years ago. The parallels to my situation are striking, but with one key difference: she's even more vulnerable than I was. After agonizing over the moral implications, I created an anonymous email account and sent her a detailed warning with evidence. Whether she believes it or not is out of my hands, but my conscience is clear. In an unexpected development, I received a call from a detective in Mark's hometown investigating the suspicious circumstances of his father's death 12 years ago. Apparently, our case prompted them to re-examine old evidence. I don't know the details, but Tom mentioned insurance policies and suspicious prescription medications. Kira invited me to her son's birthday party next month. After seeing photos of the little boy, there's no question he's Mark's biological son. He has the same distinctive eyes and dimpled smile. Kira's husband has adopted him, and they're a beautiful family. What started as a painful reminder has evolved into a friendship I treasure. We've both survived the same nightmare and emerged stronger. Final update: 1 year later. It's been exactly 1 year since I found my shredded wedding dress. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. Other times the panic attacks make it feel like yesterday. The legal saga continues. Diane is now in a psychiatric facility after an incident involving Mark's newest fiancé, not the church friend's daughter. That engagement lasted only 2 months before she disappeared from social media entirely. This new woman, Jessica, was hospitalized with accidental poisoning at a family dinner. Tests revealed antifreeze in her wine glass. Only her glass. Diane's clearly escalating. Mark has managed to distance himself legally from his mother's actions, but the district attorney is building a conspiracy case against both of them related to the surveillance operation they ran on me and potentially others. My testimony is scheduled for next month. The investigation into Mark's father's death has been officially reopened as a potential homicide. I provided the detectives with everything I know, which isn't much, but apparently Kira had crucial information about conversations Mark had during their relationship about large insurance payouts and Diane's special tea that his father drank daily. I've established a nonprofit foundation with Tom and 2 of Mark's other exes, dedicated to helping people escape manipulative relationships and rebuilding their lives afterward. We've already helped 23 people start over safely with new identities, housing, and employment. The work is healing something broken inside me. The most unexpected turn came 3 months ago when I received a package containing my grandmother's restored necklace, professionally repaired and cleaned. The note with it was from someone named Alexander, who identified himself as Mark's father's brother, an uncle I never knew existed, because Mark claimed his father was an only child. The note read, "This belongs with you." I've been overseas for many years and only recently learned what my nephew and sister-in-law have been doing. My brother would be horrified. I was unable to save him, but perhaps this small gesture can help repair some of the damage our family has caused. I've enclosed a journal my brother kept in his final years. I believe the authorities should see it, but I wanted you to have it first. Be happy, be safe, and know that not all family legacies are poisoned. The journal contained detailed accounts of psychological abuse, manipulative behavior, and suspicions about slowly administered poison, along with love letters never sent to an old girlfriend Diane had supposedly driven away. The pages were a haunting parallel to my own experience, written decades earlier. I testified at Diane's competency hearing last week. Seeing her across the courtroom, medicated and subdued, I felt something unexpected. Pity. The woman who tormented me, who orchestrated the systematic destruction of my life and others, looked hollow and diminished without her manipulative armor. As for me, I'm still in Seattle, now with a rescue dog who alerts me when my anxiety spikes. I've changed my name legally and completed extensive therapy, including EMDR for the trauma. I'm cautiously beginning to date again, with firm boundaries and a new understanding of red flags. I wear my grandmother's necklace every day now, not just as a reminder of survival, but as a talisman of the woman I've become, stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of my peace and autonomy. To everyone who supported me through this saga, thank you for helping me reclaim my story. To anyone reading who recognizes their own relationship in these words, there is life after leaving, and it's more beautiful, more authentic, and more yours than you can possibly imagine.